Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to fabulous Hall 2 here in King's Place, admin centre of London Sinfonietta, who is absolutely delighted to welcome all of you this evening to a very special event in association with Poet in the City, a special evening of intertwined film, poetry and brand new music. A big hello to everybody on our live stream. Hello, those of you watching at home. And a huge welcome to all of you here in the hall right now. How amazing is it? We're in a live, actual place. Welcome, everybody. So, forgive me stating the obvious, but the cameras around are for the live stream. So if you feel like doing something weird in front of them, you're going to be famous and maybe not in a good way. So, for those of you new to London Sinfonietta, you should know that it's one of the most celebrated contemporary music ensembles on the planet, made up of world-class musicians. It exploded onto the experimental new music scene back in 1968, rapidly amassing an extraordinary international track record of performances of groundbreaking music, including commissions, recordings, and world premieres of music by some of the world's leading composers, collaborating with many of the most exciting and admired artists and musicians around. And the ensemble also prides itself on a strong educational track record, connecting with local communities in various outreach projects and extending artistically in interdisciplinary collaborations with visual artists, filmmakers, fashionistas, writers, and more. And in this vein, this year, London Sinfonietta has been promoting a series of concerts under the title New Times, New Music, engaging with global and social issues and digging out pithy stories about contemporary life as inspiration for new music. And as part of this, Poet in the City was asked if some of their latest poems might be set to music by composers working with the ensemble. Now, luckily for us, they said yes, and tonight you're going to be hearing a selection of poems, live and on film, commissioned through Poet in the City projects that took place during the very heart of lockdown in collaboration with communities around the country. And super excitingly, also you're going to be hearing the setting of some of those poems by 4 fabulous composers. Now, for you music types new to Poet in the City, it began in the late 90s as a subsidised poetry education project, and it's one of those miraculous organisations bringing communities together through art. And it's raised funds for poets to run workshops in schools across London, encouraging young people to read and write poetry, and now has expanded across the country, hosting poetry projects in a multitude of venues, from libraries to art centres, car parks to community centres, festivals to music halls. Now, vaccination centres. So, one of the poetry projects behind tonight's show is called A Drop of Hope, and it's based just around the corner at the Crick Institute. I know quite a few people here got their jab done there. I think a couple of the players. Any of you lot got jabbed around the corner? Yeah, a few nods. The Crick Institute was is a public exhibition and event space now turned into a busy vaccination centre, seeing apparently some 1,000 people a day at peak capacity. I don't know about you, but I always think of one nurse just... Anyway, in this project, A Drop of Hope, it involved 12 virtual poets in residence responding to the shifting pandemic crisis. And inspired by the words of vaccine volunteers, those being vaccinated, and the local community visiting the Crick, some 8,000 plus experiences were gathered. And the poetry has been written in English, Bengali, and Somali. So these poems are currently being exhibited outside the Crick as a large, colourful display to engage and inspire those coming for their jabs. And apparently, more than 27,000 people have visited the vaccine centre since the first display was installed, and many thousands more are expected to see it before it's de-installed later this year. And the second Poet in the City project behind this evening's show involved 4 Sheffield-based poets' response to the British Library exhibition Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms, Art, Word, War. There's an uncompromising exhibition title for you. Now, the poets gathered the experiences of library visitors and local people through poetic journalism, listening workshops, and pop-up interventions. Sounds a bit scary, pop-up poets, but... and the voices of the local community once again were integral to the creation of new poetry. Including works from this project, you're going to be seeing excerpts from a film made just a couple of months back in March called Where Two Rivers Meet, a digital celebration of poetry and performance in Sheffield, reimagined through the COVID lens. Now, after the performance, for those of you in the hall, although not for you lot online, I'm going to be chatting briefly with a few of the composers and poets from tonight's show, and I'm sure they're going to have very interesting stuff to say. So if you'd like to hear that, you can just stay in your seats at the end of the performance, and those of you that need to go, there'll be a brief pause when you can exit. But once you've gone out, you can't come back in. So... yeah, I think that's all the housekeeping out of the way. Last thing to say is that London Sinfonietta is enormously grateful to Poet in the City for this fab chance to join forces, to add the voice of music to these powerful and inspiring poems rooted in the words of the communities behind them, now shared with you, the audience, as we all continue together to try and make sense of these shifting times. Enjoy the performance.
Now, my next guest is Joe Kriss, another one of the poets commissioned to write new work for collections in verse. Joe, I understand that you were inspired to think about identity when you saw the Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms exhibition. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
We're still struggling with these issues of national identity today, and finding out and reading and researching about all the different kingdoms that were emerging around this time. I think the Anglo-Saxon period offers a really interesting beginning point for us to explore some of these themes about what nationality means to us.
And you were based at Woodseats Library. How did you get some of the local people involved in exploring some of the themes with you?
For some time I was sat at the front of the library, trying to look as friendly as possible. Luckily a few people were up for kind of talking to me and having conversations and kind of interrupting me as I was writing poems. And that was a really interesting stepping off point for some of the poems. And also I was running young writers workshops. I met one of the young writers there called Django, and we did a number of workshops exploring ideas around kind of identity and nationalism. A lot of people have a sense of feeling English or feeling British, but they don't necessarily know where this comes from. And I try to kind of capture this idea that we kind of almost inherit our culture through language, really. It could be bits of film, it could be stories our parents have told us. That's where our kind of own sense of identity comes from. Hello. Hi, it's absolutely lovely to be here tonight. I think just on a personal note, this is the first time I've stepped on a stage for about a year and a half. So it is absolutely lovely to be here and to be reading some poems for you all. So I'm going to read 3 poems tonight, and as you've heard, they're all been inspired by the Anglo-Saxon exhibition, and the project was all run in collaboration with the British Library and Poet in the City. So myself as a poet had a process of researching some of the sort of the issues and the triggers around the exhibition while working with communities directly in Sheffield to kind of form new ideas about poems, and also run creative writing workshops at Woodseats Library as well, where members of the community wrote their own poems. So all of the poems that I'm reading tonight were kind of born basically from my interpretation of the exhibition, alongside working directly with members of the communities in Sheffield. And, you know, for me, I think the kind of the real sort of triggers, the real things that I got from both the exhibition and from the conversations that I was having was really thinking about these issues around sort of identity and nationalism. And all the poems I've written that I'm reading tonight were all written before the pandemic. And I think, you know, there's nothing like a kind of global pandemic to make you nostalgic about Brexit. But, you know, I suppose that you know, that was kind of the, you know, the environment where I was kind of thinking and dealing with these issues, and had some really amazing conversations with both a young writers group, an adult writers group, sort of an adult reminiscence group, and also just people who were coming in and out of Woodseats Library. So that's kind of where all these poems have come from. So the kind of starting point was the inspiration of the Anglo-Saxon exhibition, and they kind of evolved with sort of input from members of the communities as well. This first poem I'm going to read tonight is actually the sort of last poem as part of the sequence of poems that I wrote. And it was primarily kind of inspired by conversations I was having with a young writers group. So obviously a museum exhibition, you know, it's presented in a very sort of formal way, where you'd have sort of items in display cases, sort of quotes on the wall. And I ran a session with these young writers thinking about how our age, our time, might be thought of in, you know, hundreds and thousands of years by people who might be trying to learn about our age in exactly that fashion. And sort of through conversations with young people, they saw it, you know, naturally within a lens of kind of the climate crisis, and trying to think about how our age would be understood in hundreds of years' time. And the poem's called Life Reduces Evidence, and it goes like this. A museum assistant in a long white cloak wears gloves as they pick across finds tagged with my DNA profile across a table. This is no Staffordshire hoard. Almost everything is plastic or glass. The oldest items in the collection are toys. A beaten grey mutant biker mice from Mars toy, and a small plaque next to the find states it was found during renovations at what was once known as Greenwich Park, presumed lost at a family picnic in the 1990s. A small collection of early 21st century music encased in reflective metal discs. A note states that traces of my handwriting were found on the laminated album sleeves. A 3D projection hosts my digital imprint from this time. A school photograph, university records, bills, and Facebook messages rotate in the air. A pixelated video screen plays short clips from Game of Thrones and Friends. A voiceover states that Joe was born in the early Anthropocene. He was one of the only 20% of the world population at that time that had ever boarded a plane. Italicized quotes mark world events as turning points. As people move to the exit, they shake their head and think of dinner and Sunday dread. The world is neither giver nor gift, mother or captor, but a living thing. The land will never forget these few hundred years. They will be plucked like splinters from the ground, like a body rejecting teeth. So that's the Life Reduced as Evidence poem that was inspired by the Young Writers groups. And the next poem I'm going to read is called Englalande. And for those of you who might have been hoping for a kind of football-free zone tonight, might be cruelly disappointed by a brief note in the context of this poem. So the Old English spelling of England is Englalande, and for me personally, as soon as I kind of read that and come across it, it just really, I was just struck by you know, experiences of watching football or going to football games and hearing that chant from sort of terrace choirs, and I was just really struck by you know, that relationship just between a word over time, over such a huge expanse of history, and what that might mean, and that tying into all of these issues of sort of nationality and identity that I've been considering and working with people in Sheffield and Woodseat. So this poem is called Inglalande. Terrace choirs sing for glory, chanting Inglalande across a floodlit pitch. They are resurrecting our past, pulling on ancestral shadow lives that only remain in coiled genetic code, and the splinters of language reshaped by the vibrations passing between ear and tongue. To name a place is to call it into being. Each song is a reckoning, a moment of rebirth. Yet when we paper chain ourselves back from now, past generations of living memory, past speech, what is it of Inglalande that remains? How do you pull yourself together from a song you can't trace? So that's the Inglalande poem, and again you can kind of see those, hopefully those themes of kind of trying to understand where our national identity kind of comes from, and our relationship to place and our relationship to land, and thinking about who we are and where we've come from. Which leads me to the last poem I'm going to read, and there's also the poem that has been adapted tonight by Gavin and the London Sinfonietta for a performance which you will hear very shortly. And this is actually the first poem that I wrote as part of the kind of wider commission. And it kind of, in a way, it's a bit of a summary of all these kind of themes and ideas that I've been talking about. And the poem's called Kin, and it begins with sort of a small epigraph, which is, "The past is a foreign country, they do things differently there." England falls between the gaps in our sentences. This green and pleasant land curls your vowels. A few miles in any direction is enough for a new accent to stiffen your upper lip. Yet it is not just sound, but the shape of our thoughts that are inherited. By day, we are a nation of shopkeepers who no longer keep shop for the world. The factories have closed down, and now cathedrals of glass and steel trade our future in algorithms too removed from us to understand. At night, we dress for our appearances. A man in a short-sleeved shirt and a borrowed World War pushes past you at the bar. The Industrial Revolution coiled tight in a coiled bicep. A taut spine as if his country sits proudly in the middle of a map. CCTV on chipped white columns looks out for trouble across streets dimly lit by a faded empire haunted by the possibility of violence. We're 45th generation Roman, Angles, Saxons and Normans, Germans and Franks, mother of both Parliament and dark satanic mills. Our identity is fractured, nostalgic, shaped by history and chance. The past is unwritten, a place where we look to find the thread for our own beginnings. We hope something somewhere knows who we really are, and it is the shape of this hope that we must meet. Or you will look for it in the wrong places, like history, like despair. Thank you very much.
A few miles in any direction is enough to find a new accent, to stiffen your belief. Yet it's not just sound, but the shape of our thoughts that are inherited. By day, we're a nation of shopkeepers who no longer keep shop for the world. Our factories have closed, no cathedrals of glass, and still trade our future in algorithms to remove from us to understand. At night, we dress for our appearances. A man in a short-sleeved shirt and a borrowed one pushes past you at the bar. The Industrial Revolution held tight in a coiled bicep. A taut spine, as if his country sits proudly in the middle of a map. CCTV on chipped white columns looks out for trouble across streets dimly lit by a faded empire, haunted by the possibility of violence. We're 45th generation Roman, Angles, Saxons, Germans, both Parliament and God's attended this. Our identity is fractured, not standing. My history, chance. The past is unwritten. A place where we look to find the thread for our own beginning. by those that come.
Hello, my name is Fathima Zahra. I'll be reading a couple of poems from the Drop of Hope project, which was done in collaboration with the Poet in the City and the Francis Crick Institute, as you heard earlier. This first one is called The Crick by Will Harris. I didn't expect to be nervous. In the morning, light shone through the colored glass. I was nervous but happy. After losing Auntie, after losing my best friend, I said, please, don't point your temperature gun at my head. We watched the news. We worked 84 hours a week and only received a rainbow badge. He lost his work overnight. Never-ending screen time. I've not danced with anyone in a year. My daughter was born. I got to know the shops in Wood Green. 4 cabs. That's how many I tried to flag down to get here. Don't know how they knew. Was it my hair? My skin tone? I wore shades to hide my eyes. A snow moon hung over London as I traveled home. It looked like I felt. When I was approached for this project, I was pretty excited because it felt like 2 of my worlds collided. I studied biomedical sciences for my undergrad, so the language we've been encountering over the past year was a part of my daily. And I wrote poetry on the side, and as is often the case with poetry, I ended up writing a poem that was completely different from what I'd imagined I'd write. We poets were given access to an archive of reflections from the visitors, the people who were vaccinating, and we were asked to write a poem inspired by it. I came across one of the entries that said that this time we've been in, it felt like purgatory, and this sparked the poem. Purgatory. It's like I'm back on the flat again. Its walls sun-licked and sand-swept. The smell of baby powder and wet wipes. Mum asked us to wash our hands and shed the outside before we crossed the threshold of her bedroom to hold my baby sister. Days pour into nights. The din of traffic and azan is all I know of the outside. It swirls and skates without me. On afternoons that time stills into my parents' snores, I slide into their cupboard, close the door on myself. Before the sphere of small spaces, before this ache for others' hands and bodies. I imagined ballrooms into the cramped cupboard, wrapped myself in my mum's shawls and abayas, called myself a queen where no one can contest it. I've outgrown that first flat, my bed, the wide mouth of my room, the allotted spaces in supermarkets and tube carriages. I linger now at the choice of cereal, palm each mango that I take home, pretend this too is an intimacy. I haven't hugged a friend in 14 months, so God sends me dreams where I do. When the world opens up, I'll be at the gates, feet twitching, palms clenched, like it's the first day of school and I'm ready to use all the words and ways of being I've only seen on TV. Thank you.
It's like I'm back in the flat again. It's all sun-licked and sand-swept. The smell of baby powder and wet wipes. Mom asks us to wash our hands and shed the outside before we the threshold of her bedroom, to hold my baby sister. Days pour into nights, the din of traffic, and azan is all I heard of outside. It swirls and skates without me. On the afternoons, the time steals into my parents' nose. I slide into their cupboard, close the door on myself. contest it. I've outgrown that first flat, my bed, the wide mouth of my room, and the allotted spaces in supermarkets and tube carriages. I linger now at the choice of cereals. Palm each mango that I take home. Pretend this too is an intimacy. I haven't hugged a friend in 14 months. So God sends me dreams where I do. When the world opens up, I'll be at the gates. When the world opens up, I'll be at the gates, feet twitching, palms clenched, like it's the first day of school, and I'm ready to use all the words and ways of being. I have only seen on
Of partings and preludes, Mumtaza Mary. Give us the gift of an hourglass, the curve of its translucent neck, the slow trickle of its promise, every ordinary wonder of every ordinary day. This will be our way of counting second chances. The measurements we need surround us. In the sun's steady incline, a child chasing her own shadow. In the scattered fall of reddening leaves, the regularity of rattling trains and holiday decorations. Phone lines crackle. Connections flutter. Time spent alone can be an airless room. Togetherness is a language we relearn. These are odd days of stumbling over our words, our intentions, of inventing new vocabularies of distant digital bonds, a unity in separation. Veils of difference dissolve like borders between bedrooms and conference rooms, between kitchens and classrooms, between neighbours and friends. Live like eager seedlings, giving ourselves up to the light, glittering ahead, the shifting of priorities. The choices we still have. Believe, because we must. Give us the morning's daily promise of reinvention, this knowledge that we can lick our wounds, try again. Grief may thicken, may be hard to swallow. Better to share it in familiar routines. Swear by the little things, tea-stained afternoons, board games around busy tables, the inviting scent of freshly baked bread. A shy fox nudging its wet snout against a row of violets, collecting dewdrops on its pink tongue. All that is wild returns, resurfaces from the hush of devastation. We are lost in the losing, only to find each other in sterile waiting rooms, the quiet of clinics and queues. Welcomed by a family of frontline defenders, we await a dawn we can once again claim. Its rays will spill across our faces, a touch to warm the skin, to make it sing. Yeah, I'm Nahmed, and I am one of the Francis Crick A Drop of Hope poets. And when I was asked to contribute to the project, I was in the much earlier stages of pregnancy. And at that point, the vaccines were not going to be rolled out to pregnant women. And when I was reading through the archives of the volunteers and those who were visiting the Crick to get their vaccines, particularly in that very early stage, there was a mixture of emotions through what people were writing. And there was fear, there was kind of uncertainty, but there was a sense of being aware that what they were doing was actually not just for their own safety, but for other people's safety. And I thought that was such an extraordinary moment for us as a world, really, that people were putting each other's safety ahead of really their own, taking that risk with these vaccines that were new and doing that in order to keep everybody safe. And many people made so many sacrifices, missing the partings of loved ones in those terrible days of the first lockdowns. And I just wanted to articulate a kind of gratitude for that kind of bigger act of collective sacrifice. And I couldn't find the words, so I resorted to Bengali. ধন্যবাদ The word dhonnobad in Bangla is near to untranslatable. The closest to a meaning in English might be, I acknowledge your goodness and speak my blessings upon you. As I sit with the life fluttering within me, afraid for us both and helpless, I am calm too in this knowing that each of you will keep us safe. That means more than I have English words to say. So, to each of you standing in the queue, waiting for the shot in your arm, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you who have walked past here on your precious hour of calm, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you within these walls, gentling the afraid, your kindness a balm, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you within these labs, searching for ways to keep us from harm, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you who made the hardest choices, setting aside your qualms, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you, placing a drop of hope into this bitter ocean of fear and pain, it is your single drop that will turn it sweetly salt again. And me and my unborn child reach out from our hearts with this refrain, dhonnobad. It means the world.
To each of you, standing in the queue, waiting for the shot in your arm, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you who have walked past here on your precious hour of calm, from me and my unborn child, dhonnobad. To each of you within these walls, gentling the afraid, your kindness a balm, from me and my unborn child. To each of you within the labs, searching for ways to keep us from harm, through this bitter ocean of fear and pain. It is your single drop that will turn it sweetly salt again. And me and my unborn child reach out from our hearts with this refrain. Don't abide, don't abide, don't abide, don't abide, don't abide, don't It means the world.
I think in Firth Park it was really wonderful because there's such a connection to Sheffield dialect speech. I'm thinking in particular about the ways that the community is one of the most mixed. So of necessity, the language in Firth Park has always been a mixture of different influences. And then if you add that to Sheffield dialect speech, then some really amazing things open up. And I think for me, that's what's really fascinating about Firth Park. You have this mixture of people from across the UK, so there's a lot of different UK accents, and then you mix that with accents from around the world and words from around the world, and you get this really rich soup of language. A northerly aspect. We flew south, and though Wandsworth alleyways banished her wares from my diction, still my heart has a northerly aspect, quite apart from this voice that divides opinion when I carry it far from home. How to gesture towards tall ships, Grace Darling, bottles of pop, Bobby Shafter, the part of me lost to the realm of ledgers, of legend, the part that ascribes to darkness light, here where the landscape is a long conversation, and the breeze a list of the missing and of the dead, read from the surface of these stones that do not forget.
So when you were in Firth Park, you were based at the library, where I believe you attended children's groups, coffee mornings, and got some crucial local insight from the library staff. So what was it like hanging out as a poet in the library?
There's an ephemerality to the population of a library, which I think is wonderful. There are people just popping in to print something off, or just popping in to look something up, or using the library as a kind of community hub as well. And I talked to some of those people as well about their relationship to language. So it was just a real mixture of everyone who passed through the library. I had a lot of fun, I should say, interacting with words in that way and arguing with people about whether it's ginnel or gennel or ginnel or gennel was really fun. And, you know, the jury is still out on that. An interstice, a quarter tone. Last known whereabouts of missing persons the world over. From the Old English, the coast's open moor pointing the way to the Whale Road. Gap in the teeth of a terraced street. Love. Hang around. This town will mind you of how little you need. To breathe. Love. Hang around. This town will mind you of how little you need. To speak and find an echo. Breathe good air amid mid-afternoon's demands. As a water droplet falls from spring leaves. Indiscriminate endearment. Fleck of grace, it lands. I see you.
I see